Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Are you excited to be here today? Oh, that didn't sound very excited. Come on. Are you excited to be here today?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I, too, am excited to be here today. I flew all the way in from Houston, Texas, where we have the Johnson Space Flight Center, where I spent 30 years of my career there. But like you, I always had an interest in math and science, but I knew where I wanted to work. So I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about that today. But before we get to talking about my story or about where NASA is headed and where human spaceflight is headed, I want to show you just a short video that I think you will find very exciting.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
Artemis 1 will lift off from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 8.8 million pounds of thrust provided by the most powerful rocket in the world, our Space Launch System rocket, or SLS. The uncrewed flight will be the first integrated test of SLS, our new Orion spacecraft, and exploration ground systems at Kennedy. Artemis 1 will send Orion beyond the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth, farther than any human spacecraft has ever flown.
This is not NASA doing this. This is the United States of America doing this program, the Artemis program, and there are companies all across our country that have a part in it, so there is kind of this wave of excitement being generated just by saying, we're going back to the moon.
After the upper stage of the rocket separates from Orion, the upper stage will deploy small satellites over several days to perform science experiments and technology demonstrations. Orion will make its multi-day outbound trip to the moon, propelled by a service module provided by the European Space Agency. Engineers will test Orion's systems on the way to the moon. Then, Orion will fly about 60 miles above the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and engines on the service module to enter a lunar orbit. After about a month and a total distance of over 1 million miles, Orion will return home, faster and hotter than any spacecraft has before. A primary goal of Artemis 1, ensure Orion safely returns to Earth before we fly with humans. When we do, we'll build our capability for sustainable lunar exploration, preparing us for missions farther into the solar system.
So what do you guys think about that? So I got to spend the last part of my NASA career working on the Artemis vehicle. I got to manage the scientists that will eventually decide what science the astronauts will be executing on the surface of the moon and Mars. I got to manage the people that build the spacesuits that the astronauts will be wearing when they get to the surface. And then I got to manage a bunch of different people that are building the spacecraft, testing the spacecraft, training the crews, training the flight control teams, and that will be actually executing the mission. So there's a lot of excitement. You always hear about the astronauts, and yeah, astronauts are cool, but there's a lot of other jobs out there, so we're gonna talk to you about some of those. But these are some of the pictures that some of my friends took recently. In the video, it said the Artemis 1 mission. That is our first mission going back to the moon, and it's scheduled to launch in June. They actually just rolled out the vehicle to the launch pad. So I love these pictures. A couple of friends of mine took these. We're going to be doing some tests where we fire up the engines, we load all the fuel, we fire up the engines to make sure that things work, because you want to test everything before you actually do it. And then we'll be flying this vehicle for the first time in June. But there's also a vehicle is Snoopy. So I am a huge Snoopy fan. I was here in November. Did anybody see the Thanksgiving Day parade with the astronaut Snoopy? I was one of the balloon holders in that one, because I know the Peanuts Corporation and the wife of Charles Schultz, and they asked me to do that on NASA's behalf, so that was great. So I'm hoping, since I'm such a Snoopy fan, that after Snoopy does his lap around the moon, that he's going to need a place to go, a place to live out the rest of his life. And so I'm hoping that humans, that is preferable. So even with the SpaceX vehicle that is now flying our astronauts to and from the space station, we did a test flight with no people on it. There is a Boeing vehicle that is currently under development that we're going to be having another flight test of later this year with no people on it. Because the goal is you want to make sure it's safe for humans before you actually put people on it. And eventually we will put people on it, and the goal is to return to the surface of the moon. And you might think, well, why do we want to go to the moon? We've already been to the moon. We've been there, done that with Apollo. So with the Apollo program, we had astronauts visiting the surface of the moon, coming back home, doing another short visit on the surface of the moon, coming back home. But this time, we're going to stay. So we want to set up a habitat on the surface of the moon so that we can actually colonize it and practice living on the surface of another planet, so that way we can be more prepared if we want to go somewhere else, like Mars. And the way and recently NASA had a competition, and they just awarded SpaceX, so that's the one on the far right, that huge vehicle. And it's really big. You need an elevator actually to get down to the surface of the moon. But Elon Musk's concept is he wanted to have this vehicle also be the vehicle that would take humans to Mars or any sports or places beyond just the surface of the moon. So he's going to be using it as a practice. But then you also have Blue Origin, the one on the top left, and Dynetics, the one on the bottom left. So there's the message here is, when I was growing up, if you wanted to go work in the space program, you had to work at NASA, because there was no other companies, no one doing that. But you get the advantage of, yeah, you can go work at NASA, and it's a wonderful place to work. I've been there 30 years. But there's so many other different companies doing really cool stuff that you have an opportunity to go work. So you've got plenty more options than I ever had to work in the space industry. And for our astronauts that are going to be setting foot on the moon, there's a couple of folks here that have ties to New York. So if you look at Jasmine at the bottom, Mobelli, she is from the local area. I think her elementary school is about 5 miles away from the museum, and I just spoke with her, so she was happy that I was able to come today. But one of these astronauts, actually 2 of these astronauts, will be setting foot on the moon. So you can look at all, when you look at the Apollo astronauts, they were a very specific type. There were no women, and they were all test pilot type folks. But look at all the wide variety of different people now that have the ability to have careers as astronauts. So one day, one of my friends, 2 of my friends, 4 of my friends will be on the surface of the moon. And everything that you see up here on the screen, whether it's the lunar terrain vehicle, the habitat, that is an opportunity for you. The astronauts don't build these things. It's engineers, it's scientists that go and figure out how do we design these habitats, how do we design these rovers, how do we test them, how do we make sure they're going to work, how do we make sure they have enough power or they can survive the extreme temperatures of being on the moon. So there's all of these opportunities for you with this new Artemis program. I always talk about, I'm a huge sports person. I grew up playing sports, and I like to draw parallels between sports and my career. And human spaceflight is the ultimate team sport. So those astronauts would not be able to get onto the surface of the moon without a huge team of people, thousands and thousands of people. So these are some of the types of jobs that would be available to you to participate in the human spaceflight program. So did you know we have food scientists? So there's actually a food lab at NASA, because you can't just have like a sandwich. You can't open a loaf of bread in space, because the bread will float and you'll be breathing your bread. And so they wind up using tortillas, actually, which I find fascinating. But they have to do different tests on how do you hydrate the food, how do you make sure the food will stay good if you're going to be on the surface of the moon for X number of days, how do you grow your own vegetables. And then we have people that work in mission control. That's a pretty common understanding job, because you see that one in the movies. But then there's also technicians and mechanics. people that are responsible for our communications on social media or designing the cool graphics that you saw in the video. So don't think that everybody at NASA is an astronaut or a flight controller or an engineer or a scientist. There are a lot of different job opportunities available to you. But they're not just going to hand them to you. You have to come up with a plan for your life. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about me and how I got to where I am. So I was born in El Paso, Texas. My mom was born in Delicias, Chihuahua. She crossed over when she was 4 years old. My dad was born in Owensboro, Kentucky. So Owensboro, Kentucky and Delicias, Chihuahua made me. I had 2 older sisters and an older brother. And I was the first one to say, when I was 5 years old, my parents were like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'm like, oh, I want to either be a professional basketball player or an astronaut. And my dad was a dairy farmer, so he knew cows. My mom wasn't working. She was a housewife. So they looked at me like, okay, how are you going to go about doing that? I'm like, I don't know, I'm only 5 years old. So they said, hey, you got to go to college, and we're not going to be able to afford to put you through college, so you got to make sure you get scholarships. And so I learned really early on what scholarships were. I was really serious in high school, so I figured most of you are junior high and high school, so I'd share some of my high school, excuse the 80s hair. But I buckled down in high school. I studied, I was on the math club, I was in the science club, I was president of the National Honor Society, because I really wanted those scholarships, because it turns out, I mentioned my dad was a dairy farmer. He wound up passing away when I was 11 years old, and he was the breadwinner. And so when he died, my mom was like, all right, we weren't going to be able to pay for school before, and we're really not now, because I just got a job, and I'm making 1/5 of what your dad is making, and I don't even know how we're going to make rent every month. And so I knew I had to do everything I possibly could to make sure that I could pay for school, because I really wanted to work at NASA, and I really wanted to be a professional basketball player. So I focused on my academics, I focused on my athletics, and I played volleyball, I played basketball, and it was great. So all of that focus really paid off, because when I graduated from high school, I was number 2 out of 560, number 2 by 1/1000th of a point. Not that I still carry that with me. But I was also voted El Paso's Female Athlete of the Year for the whole city. So if you put your mind to something, you can do it. And I'm glad I did, because I was afforded a lot of different scholarships. And I wound up staying at the University of Texas, El Paso for 2 years. I made the women's basketball team there. I blew out my knee. And so I couldn't pursue my dream of becoming a professional basketball player, so I had to go with my backup dream of being an astronaut. But eventually I found myself at Texas Tech on scholarship, and I majored in physics. So I got my bachelor's degree in physics, and I got my master's degree in physics. And while I was in college, I started an internship with NASA. And I remember the first day I showed up at work. I was like 21 years old, and it's my first opportunity to work at NASA, and I'm driving in, and they had this big Saturn rocket that you could see as you were driving into work, and the sun was rising right behind the rocket, and I remember crying, and I'm like, oh my God, why am I crying? I'm not a wuss. But I did. I started crying because I had achieved what I had set, the goals I'd set myself for when I was 5 years old, that I wanted to work at NASA. So I eventually got to NASA, and it was a great experience. I started there as an intern in '91, and then once I got my master's degree, I started working there permanently, and I had so many cool opportunities. So if you get a chance today, there's a small section of the museum with this man, Bill Shepard. He's the one on the far left. He was the commander of the very first crew for the International Space Station. And I got assigned to him back in 1997 to help train him to fly on the International Space Station. And he's an ex-Navy SEAL. He has ties to the local area, and he has an exhibit here at the museum. So he spent some time looking at that. But you know, when he asked me to join his team, I'm thinking, wow, I was only like 26 years old at the time, and I get assigned to the first crew that's going to fly on board the space station and teaching astronauts. I didn't even know that was a real job back when I was your age. I'm like, I didn't know they had astronaut instructors. So I had an opportunity to do that. And then because he was flying to the International Space Station, and when we were, the first elements of the International Space Station that we were building were Russian. So he spent probably 70% of his time in Russia training, meeting with the people designing the space station pieces, hardware. And so I spent 70% of my time in Russia. And I wound up living in Russia for almost 4 years, 3.5 years. I can speak Russian better than Spanish now because I spent so much time out there. But I didn't know, and when they told me part of your job is to go to Russia, I could have gone, what? No. But I did, and I'm so glad I did. I loved it. I got to learn the language. I got to learn a different culture. I have friends there that I still talk to today. So it was a really great experience, and I got to learn about their history of human spaceflight. I knew the American history of human spaceflight, but it was really great to talk to, here they teach you that the father of modern rocketry is Goddard. In Russia, they teach you that the father of modern rocketry is Sergei Korolev. And so I got to meet Sergei Korolev's grandson and talk to him about how his dad helped advance Russian rocketry. So there was all kinds of experiences that I had that I wouldn't have had otherwise if I'd have been too scared to go. And it was intimidating to go to a different country and not know the language, but I'm really, really glad I did that because I got a very unique skill set. I understood how the Russians built their hardware. I understood how the Americans built their hardware. I understood how the Russians were training the crew to operate on board the space station. Same thing for the US. And I also understood how the Russian mission control was going to operate and work with the US mission control. And with that unique skill set, I was afforded a new opportunity. So how many of you have seen movies with, a mission control? And you've heard, Houston, we have a problem, okay? Whenever that happens, the person in mission control that answers the crew, that says, yo, what's your problem? Or maybe a little bit more professional than that. But the person that answers is called the capsule communicator, the CAPCOM. And up until this point in NASA's history, that job had always been filled by an astronaut. But for the International Space Station, they asked me to do it. They asked me to be the very first person that wasn't an astronaut to do that job. And I thought, okay, why do you think I'm qualified to do that? And they said, do you understand the history of why it's always been an astronaut? And I didn't. And they said, the people in space that were flying a particular vehicle, the shuttle, Gemini, Apollo, you name it, that the astronauts wanted to talk to someone on the ground that had been through training on that vehicle, that understood what the crew's responsibilities were, that understood what the ground responsibilities were. And so for the space station, this was brand new. And I was right there with the first crew. So I knew all of that. And so when they asked me to do it, I thought, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And I was so scared. I remember just my very first day, and I show up, and the person in charge of mission control, the flight director, if you've seen the movie Apollo 13, the dude with the buzz cut and the vest that's in charge, there was a guy that looked almost exactly like that. And he looks at me and he's like, what are you doing here? I heard they're going to let you do it. You're not an astronaut. And I thought, okay, great. Thanks for the vote of confidence. But I sat down and the crew called down, and I get to make my first call to space. And I did it. And then the crew member on board, he's like, Ginger, was that you? That was awesome. That was totally professional. And I'm like, unlike what you're doing to me now, because I'd known him. I trained him for 3 years as well. So it was weird. I got paid to talk to my friends about technical subjects that I was an expert in. And I loved it. I loved that job. So I was very happy that I wasn't afraid to take on some new role. And now, because I didn't screw it up, now there's actually more people that aren't astronauts doing this job than there are astronauts. So I opened up a whole new career path for people. But I did that job for 4 years and I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. But in mission control, the Capcom, sits next to the flight director, the person in charge. And I would come into work every day and I'd watch the flight director lead the team and be the boss. And I thought, I could do that. So I'm going to apply to be a flight director. And people are like, no, you can't do that. No person working as a Capcom had ever been a flight director. And I thought, no non-astronaut had ever been doing what I'm doing. And then I just survived 4 years in Russia, so you can't tell me nothing. So I went ahead and applied for it. Sure enough, I got selected in 2005, and I was the first female Hispanic flight director in NASA's history. So, thank you. And I loved that job. So that job, the lives of the crew members are in your hands. You have ultimate authority of the mission. If the President of the United States walks into your flight control room and issues you an order that you disagree with, you have the right to throw the President out of mission control. That is how much power the flight director has over a mission. So I loved having that responsibility. I loved knowing that the lives of the crew members were in my hands. That job is not for everybody. I also love the fact that we were also responsible for the safety of the spacecraft and then the execution of the mission. And I did that job for 8 years. I flew about 30 space station missions with 30 different crews. I flew I got to certify as a shuttle flight director. I was the last person to get certified as a shuttle flight director. So I got to fly 3 shuttle missions. I got to lead spacewalks and vehicles coming and going to the space station. And I really did love that job. And I could have done that job forever as well. But about 8 years in, my boss came to me and said, hey, I need you to hang up your headset. I know this is a fun job, but I need you to help build NASA's future leaders. So around 2012, I started into a series of jobs with NASA that would span the last roughly 10 years of my career, where I was in various levels of management. So the first one that I got to do, that he asked me to do, was to be responsible for all of the people and facilities that the operations team uses to operate the space station. And so millions of dollars. I had 1,100 people that I was responsible for, both civil servants and contractors. And when they asked me to do this, he's like, what do you know about budgets and contracts? And nothing. Okay. Yeah, I guess I got new stuff to learn. So I did. I took that job not knowing any of that. And I would go find people that I thought were smart in those areas, and I'd go make a friend. And be like, hey, guess what? We're going out for coffee. Or we're going out for a drink. And you're going to teach me everything you know. And that's how I would get through. And once I learned that job, then I got asked to do another job, leading more people, having more responsibility. And by the end of my career at NASA, I was deputy director of an organization of about 400 people that did the things I was telling you earlier, designed trajectories to go to the moon and Mars, designed the science operations on the surface of the moon, and designed the spacesuits that we would use when we go outside. And I was also had 2 jobs when I left. At Johnson Space Center, you have the person that's in charge of Johnson Space Center. I was her assistant director for vision and strategy. So I loved that job, and I could have done that forever. Every job I have is like my favorite job. And I was never planning on retiring from NASA. But then last year, I got married for the first time at 51. And, thank you. And And I started looking at life a little differently. And I started thinking about when I retire, my husband and I are going to go do this. When I retire, we're going to go do this. And so NASA offered an early retirement option, and I took it. And then another company came along and said, hey, if you're not completely done with work, you have all this NASA experience, and we would like you to help our company evolve and start working with these new commercial companies and still work with the government. So I took on a job at this company called Barrios Technology. And the irony of this company was founded 42 years ago by a young woman from El Paso, my hometown. So when they offered me this job, I'm like, thanks God, that's helpful. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I took the job, and it's wonderful. Their complete focus, we're not building cool stuff, we're not designing hardware, but we have the expertise, like you, the people that other companies come to us for our expertise so they can design these missions and they can build the hardware. And it's a woman-owned business, and we take care of our people, and I just love it. So I've been there since November, and I've really, really enjoyed it. I'm happy for my 30 years at NASA, but I'm also happy to start this next chapter of my life. And so I'm going to open it up to some questions, but before I do that, as I've been telling you this story about me and my career trajectory, I think you've heard me say, oh, this was the coolest job ever, and I had so much fun. Whatever career you pick, you need to make sure that you can say that. I have had friends and family members where you'll be out to dinner and they will talk about how they hate their job and this horrible thing that happened, and I hate this person, or I hate this company. And I have no clue what that feels like. So if that is your experience with the people around you, I am here to tell you that it doesn't have to be. And your career will be so much more rewarding if you wake up every day thinking, I can't wait to get to work. I remember when I met my husband, he asked me, he's like, how much do you get paid, or when do you get paid? I'm like, I don't know. It gets deposited into my account, and it's enough. And he's like, oh my God, we're gonna have to work on that. But it was just because I had so much fun at work. So whatever you pick, you need to make sure you can make a reasonable living at it, but you also need to make sure that it's fun. Because every picture of me at NASA, I am having the best time. And I want you guys to have the best time too. So with that, I am happy to take any questions from you guys. Because this is your time. Yeah?
In Artemis, do you still use solid fuel boosters?
All right, he said, in Artemis, do you still use solid fuel boosters? Yes, the two boosters that you see, we have the external, it's basically like an external tank, and we have a combination of liquid and solid fuel. Yes?
How was it like living in Russia?
She says, how is it like living in Russia? So particularly in these days where the countries aren't exactly getting along, set that aside. When my first trip out there, people were warning me, don't smile, don't talk to anybody, they hate Americans, don't do this, don't eat that. And so I was scared. And then I got out there and I loved it. The people were so nice, and they were willing to share all of their experiences with me, and what little they had personally, they would share with me. I'll give you an example. So I got sick in Russia, got a cold, flu, something. And when you're sick in the US, normally what my coworkers and friends do would be like, ooh, stay away, stay at home, don't come near me. But in Russia, I had people knocking on my dorm room going, we heard you were sick. Here, I made you some cabbage soup, drink this. Or here, here's a bottle of hot pepper vodka. Stick your feet in really hot water and do 2 shots of this. Okay. Or here, I got you this honey that I bought from a monk that lives in the forest. Okay. But people really genuinely cared about you. So don't always trust what's out there in the news and what's out there in social media. People talk about things that try to make things more dramatic than they really are. Go and see it for yourself. So I had a really good experience out there. Good question. All right, any other do you have kids? No. So, no. I knew at 15, that is not my jam. Yeah, no, I never wanted to reproduce. And that's okay, ladies. It's okay. Because people are like, what's wrong with you? Nothing. I know myself. What's wrong with you? So, people make different choices. Some people want to have kids, some people don't. I am a good dog mom. So I work for a dog rescue and I take care of puppies. But yeah, little babies aren't my thing. Good question, though. Yeah, over here. Huh? No, I don't like little things, little people. No adoption. Yeah. He's all laughing.
Ma'am, what do like women astronauts do when they get their period?
Oh, ooh, man. Okay. Let me repeat that question. What do women astronauts do when they have their monthly reproductive cycle? So there are two options. There are pills that you can take to suppress it so that you don't have to deal with it. And then the other option is do what you do on Earth, and it works. It's fine. Yeah. All right. Yes, right here. Had the most paperwork? What part of my career had the most paperwork? Leaving NASA. I've never filled out more forms in my life. Yeah. Yes.
Did you ever feel intimidated working in a male-dominated industry?
I always love this question. Did I ever feel intimidated working in a male-dominated industry? My answer to that is whatever you expect to get in life, you will get. I never expected to have a problem working as in engineering. So I really never had one. I had one scenario where that looked like it could be a problem, and I handled it. I handled it publicly and immediately, and that word spread, and no one ever messed with me again. So don't assume, a lot of women won't go into STEM because they think it's going to be a problem. That's the wrong place to start. So assume that you will have no problems. And then when you do, handle them. And then you won't. It's a good question. Yes, up there. Huh? Oh, I said that I speak, well, I actually said it after I said it, but I speak Russian better than I speak Spanish. No, it's that part of my brain is dead. So he just asked if I could speak Spanish. So, there's some people, like there's a gentleman that's going to be flying on this Axiom space mission. His name is Michael Lopez Alegria. He was the commander for my 14th crew that I trained. He's launching on April 6th, 7th. He can speak like 6 different languages and can flip between them in like one long sentence. But my brain has English and one other thing. And so now if my mom speaks to me in Spanish, I think my response in Russian. And I have to go from Russian to English to Spanish, and by then she's moved on to another topic. So no, my brain can't process more than 2 languages at one time. Yeah?
What is your favorite thing you did with NASA?
Oh, what's my favorite thing I did with NASA? I think it was training that first crew, only because I was so young and everything was new, new to me, new to NASA, and I was able to make changes and suggestions to NASA to improve how we were supporting that space station, and people took my suggestions seriously and moved out on them, and some of the things that I set in place are still there today. And it's always neat to be part of the first time that anything happens. So I think that was it. Yeah.
I have a question. Like, did you ever find out, like, any secrets in NASA? Like, maybe, like, they're aliens or something, and to keep it a secret from the public?
So did I ever find out any secrets at NASA that we are supposed to keep secret from the public? Yes. No? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so she asked if it was difficult learning Russian in 4 years. I actually learned it in about 6 months, and yes. So when I went there, I knew the alphabet, and that was it. But every time I went to class, they were teaching the class in Russian, and I was working on developing a dual language training manual where the Russians would give me a training manual in Russian, and I would translate it, work with an interpreter to translate it into English. So I learned technical Russian first. But the fact that I had these manuals and I had all these classes all day long, that was really helpful. But I realized I couldn't ask the lady at the corner store for butter or, the regular conversational Russian. So that's when my Russian friends decided, all right, we're going to invite you over to the house tonight and we'll speak English and you speak Russian. And so then I started learning conversational Russian. But it was about being immersed in the environment that helps you learn the language better than a book. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you only go to Russia?
Huh?
Did you only go to Russia, like other countries?
No, did I only go to Russia? So for work, yes. And then, I traveled in the U.S. So I was in Florida, Huntsville, Alabama, Connecticut. But then when I was in Russia, I did a couple of side trips to London, Germany, Sweden. But some of my other friends, because it's the International Space Station, they got to take trips to Japan and Cologne, Germany, and Italy. But I never got to. I was always the Russian girl. Yeah. Yes?
So, curious, so your husband that you met, was he part of one of these, did you meet him at one of your jobs?
So, oddly, no. He worked at NASA on the SWAT team. Yes, NASA has a SWAT team. But I never met him, but it's kind of a good thing that a regular employee doesn't meet the SWAT guy, because I don't know what kind of shenanigans I'd have to get into to get pulled over by the SWAT guy. But he worked there for 6 years, but I didn't meet him until 2019. We got set up on a blind date. Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of cute. It was cute. Yeah. Yes.
What does NASA look for when choosing who's going to be selected to be an astronaut?
Oh, that's a good question. What does NASA look for when selecting their astronauts? So I was part of the astronaut selection committee for the last 2 classes of astronauts. What happens is people submit an application, and then we have people look over those to see if they meet some basic level of criteria with respect to education and experience. And then we have teams of people that then deep dive into these things. And the types of things that we look for are experience in harsh environments. It has this person, because there's people, I've lived underwater, or I lived in Antarctica for 6 months, and I've camped out at the top of Mount whatever. So those harsh environments, because it tells you something about the mindset and about what we will require when you are in space for a year, like Mark Vande Hei, who just came home today, or when you are on the way to Mars and you don't have instant communication back home. So you want to see that. Team sports is a huge thing. So we've got rugby players and soccer players and baseball players. If the military service to some extent will also help. We have some special operations folks, helicopter pilots, and then we want scientists as well. So we'll look at what types of science you're doing. Is it geology based, because that's what's going to be needed for Moon and Mars. So it's a lot of variety. Like, I can't tell you if you do these 20 things, you'll be an astronaut. But there's a wide variety of things, and it'll change based on the selection year. So we had a certain set of criteria when we were picking our shuttle astronauts. We have a different set of criteria when we're picking our space station astronauts, and we'll have a different one now that we're going back to the moon. Okay, 2 more questions. Let's see. You haven't asked one yet, I don't think. Yeah.
What is the best or most interesting mission you've ever directed?
Oh, the best or most interesting mission I've ever directed. So there was this one where I wasn't in mission control that day, but I was part of the team supporting it. So the space station has these huge solar arrays. They're big as a football field. But when we were constructing the space station, they were folded up like a little accordion. And we would unfold them as part of the mission. And so in this one particular mission, it was the STS 120 shuttle mission, we were starting to unfold this solar array. And we're watching it unfold, and the solar array has these little cells on them. And we saw two of them stick together, and it's still unfolding, and it creates this huge rip, this gash. And we couldn't stop it fast enough. And finally, we stop it, and it's like 3/4 of the way unfolded. The gash is way far away, and it's huge. It's huge. And I was supporting that mission on, normally, mission control, you have 3 teams on 9-hour shifts. And for every shuttle mission, there was always this 4th team that would wait around for bad stuff to happen. And I was leading the 4th team. And so I was chilling. First 4 days, I was like, this is easy. And then I was watching this video, and I'm like, oh, no. And so I called a meeting, and because we couldn't undock the shuttle with this rip in the solar array. I couldn't finish extending it, which meant we weren't going to be able to provide the space station with the power that it needed. So it was this horrifying crisis moment. But as I lead this meeting to talk about different options we have to fix it, this young man walks in, runs in. I have a solution, flight. I got a solution. And he holds up this thing, and he says, cufflink. I'm sorry, what did you just say? And he's all, cufflink. And he shows me this picture of how he figured out that we can install these little cufflinks to secure that area and strengthen the bond that was broken because this thing had ripped. And he's like, I've done all the math. All the crew has to do is install 7 of these things, and we'll be good, and we can finish unfolding it, and the shuttle can undock. And I'm like, all right, but this thing is almost a football field away. How are we going to access that? Oh, don't worry about that, flight. I've talked to this person, and they have an idea. We're going to take the space station arm and attach it to the shuttle arm, and then we're going to put our tallest crew member at the end of it. And I'm like, have we ever done that before? No. Okay. And so we analyzed this, and the next thing you know, I got this guy named Scott Perezinski, who we nicknamed Too Tall even before this, at the edge of this super duper arm, and he's installing cufflinks. And saved the day, and those cufflinks are still up there holding that thing together. And so I use that example because sometimes your solutions come from unexpected places. What if I'd have told him, you crazy cufflink idea? Yeah, or no, we're not going to string all these arms together with the tallest guy. What's wrong with you? We rolled with it, and it saved the day. So don't always discount the crazy idea. Put a little effort into it to see if it's really as crazy as you think it is. So, is it? All right, one more question. Yes, up there.
What are your thoughts about aliens?
Oh my gosh. I don't have thoughts about aliens. All right, one more. Right here. Oh, were you in school or in your career, did you feel like it was too hard? I studied physics. I thought it was hard every day. Yeah, I did. But I was never gonna. I didn't want to. I liked physics. I wanted to understand it, and so I would just go find somebody that looked like it was easier for, and then I'd go talk to them. All right, how are you studying? Maybe there's something wrong with how I'm studying, or how did you come up with that solution? And I would look for smart people to learn from, to see if there's something that they were doing that I was missing. But I didn't want to not do it. Now, there's some times where you may pick a major and you may get into it and be like, okay, this is not for me. Sometimes it's because it's too hard, but sometimes it's just because it doesn't feel right. Then you should look at changing. But I knew I loved physics. I just knew I needed just a little bit more help. All right, is that it? All right, thank you guys so much.